Okay, so let's start off with the changes that came in version 6. So the first one was some changes with color. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, there it is there. Okay, so the first one is this reset panel when changing effects. These have been added to several of the panels, and it really reflects this issue that we have where sometimes unexpectedly as you drop effects on, certain settings follow it. So let's turn it off, which is how it has always been in the past. And let's go and quickly drop, I don't know, it would help if we get to our matrix because it's easier to see. Okay, let's drop a color wash on our matrix, and let's turn some sparkles on. And then if we were to go up and, I don't know, drop a fire effect on by default, the sparkles would carry forward. And sometimes that's what you want it to do, but sometimes it isn't. And so you now have this ability here to tell it to disable them. So if you go and drop another fire effect, the sparkles will remain on. But if I was to go up here and now drop another color wash because I've currently got the fire effect, you'll notice the sparkles didn't come forward. Which is generally speaking what you want. Now, this doesn't impact on the colors. The colors do come forward, and you obviously have the ability to bulk update the colors using the update button. So it's just a way to manage all the settings carrying forward from effect to effect, and you ending up with surprising things like, you know, your brightness carried forward when you really didn't want to carry it forward. So that's that one. The HSV adjustment, the best way to look at this is something like the video effect. So if I plonk a video effect down here and I go and find a video, which I have a few of, let's find something like this explosion here, or it's not an explosion, but anyway. So what these adjustments here allow you to do, and these get applied after everything's been rendered, it lets me go and do things like color shift my video. So now my video is pinks rather than yellows. We'll change the duration to loop. I can also do things like change the value down, which will dim it. But I can also change the hue using a value curve. So over the course of the video, the color changes. And the saturation changes just how bright and vivid the colors are. So moving it towards the right increases it. To the left will have a tendency to take the colors out. And so it'll turn it more into pastels as it goes. So it gives you that option to take something like typically a picture effect, or a gladiator effect is probably the most useful place where you could apply this, but you can apply it on anything. It introduces some sort of interesting behaviors. So if you were to, that was interesting. So if you were to change the hue on the color effect, despite the fact that this is obviously still red and white, the colors are now shifted, and so you end up with a very different color. So it's a little bit confusing, but I wouldn't use it there. I would generally use it on something like a video effect or something like that. So that's the HSV stuff. Add a scale but keep ratio. So on the picture effect, so let's drop a picture effect. Here it is. And let's pick an image. Let's pick, I don't know, a reindeer. Okay, that's the image by default. In the past, you could click a checkbox to scale it to fit, and it does this, where it stretches it all out. Now there is a new mode which scales but keeps the aspect ratio. So it makes it as large as it can make it without distorting the image at all. And of course, you could do all the usual movements and everything else on the effect. and duration treatments to the gladiator effect. Okay, so let's go and drop a gladiator effect on. So the gladiator effects I've got here, I think, are 15 seconds long. And normally it would just play at the frame rate of the gladiator effect, but you can now slow and accelerate it where it will adjust the speed so the entire gladiator effect fits within the duration. So if you make the duration shorter, it speeds it up. You make it longer and it slows it down. And if you put it into loop mode, if it happens to be longer than the duration of the effect, it will loop back around and start the gladiator effect again. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility when you're dropping the gladiator effect, and it's now behaving much more like the movie effect does with duration. And that's it, just a couple of bugs. So not much in this release. 2017.7, I'm hoping we will finally get our 64-bit version of VAMP out. Sorry, of xLights out. I got the VAMP stuff working yesterday, so assuming it stays stable, it's probably not going to be the most stable. I've definitely noticed that it's not always as stable as it could be, so it's probably going to be a little bit rough for a while, but we'll get there. Oh, sorry, there's a couple other things here. Sorry, I looked at the carriage return there and missed it. So the pinwheel, I did add, so the pinwheel you'd all be familiar with. So there's a couple of things I did. I tried to demo last week the color gradients on the pinwheel, and I got myself into all sorts of trouble. That's another thing that's changed. Now when you right click and bring up a color curve, if there's no color curve defined, it will inherit the color of the button that you are on. Just one less thing you have to change. So if we now, I tried to do this last week and it didn't work, and the reason it didn't work in one of the demos was because I was using the old render method and that didn't support these color gradients. And so that's now been added in. And along the way, I also came up with this sweep style, which provides a sort of almost a propeller-like view, which is slightly different on the pinwheel, where it just fades over the span of the blade. And I think that's it. Yep, they're the other two enhancements. All right. So the second thing I wanted to go through was log files. xLights does produce log files. They're not exhaustive. We don't log everything. And over time, we've increasingly logged things, particularly unusual situations. Generally, we tell you when something goes wrong, but there are some times when it's just not practical to tell you something's gone wrong. So in the middle of a render routine, which is running in a background thread, it's not really possible or desirable for us to pop a message up and tell you that something's happened. Or maybe it's just an unusual circumstance and we think that we should log it so that if someone complains, we at least know what's been going on. So your log files, as you'd all be familiar, you get to via the tools and the view log, which will open up in your default text editor the log file. Now I'm going to actually switch over though to Notepad++. And I'm also using a log file from someone who's had a crash. So a lot of it is just GUMP. We log when we start, we log when we exit, we log the details of your machine. That way, when you send us a debug report, we know what sort of machine it was running on. We log a lot during startup because we've had problems in the past during startup where things didn't quite start properly, and so we have a tendency to log that sort of stuff. We also log all of your options. So in the settings menu, there's a whole bunch of options that you can set. We log all of those out as well, so we know what's going on. You'll notice most of these log levels are debug or info. Admittedly, we don't really apply this very religiously. Generally, they're one and the same. So a debug message is just a detailed message, as is info. When you get to warning or warn, it's WARN, or error or crit for critical, they're the things that you need to worry about, because that usually means something's gone wrong. Whenever an autosave occurs, it also logs the fact that the autosave happened and how long it took. When you load a sequence, it will also store the details of what's been loaded. We also load the OpenGL stuff because we've had problems with that in the past. Most of your log files then going to be filled with things like, auto-saving or not auto-saving. When you hit render, let me see if I can find some render error messages. Okay, so this is cut and paste. Again, we've had some issues with cut and paste, so we have a tendency to log what happens when you do a cut and paste. See if there's any rendering going on in this log file. Slow or pasting of data. This person's done a whole bunch of pasting of data. All right. Okay, so this also gets logged a lot. So when you start up your show, we do a backup, and here we will log exactly what files got backed up and where they were backed up to. And this person doesn't seem to have any rendering going on that's interesting. Rendering on save. Obviously, his render's pretty good. I can tell how long it took to render. Here's a crash. So the crash handler was called and it crashed on get number of strands on some model. I'm not sure what model it was. It doesn't actually tell me that. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that when you submit a bug that you don't just rely on the crash report, because the crash report really just tells us which function it crashed in, and even then we have to be somewhat lucky. It doesn't always do that. So filling in the text field to say I was trying to do this on this model or something will really help us locate exactly what went wrong. I'm going to switch over to another log file. Whoops. No, go away. Okay. All right. So the other thing we talk about is you get slow rendering. Well, slow rendering is caused by typically, a frame or whatever being slow. And so what we do is we log any frame that takes more than 150 milliseconds to render. So that's 0.15 of a second. If frames are taking 0.15 to a second, then it's obviously rendering quite slowly. And so here we can see that frame number 3 on the whole house model, which is probably a group, which is set to be 400 pixels wide by 143 pixels high. So it's a reasonably big model, which is probably explaining why it's a problem. Using the plasma effect, which is an effect which is quite commonly slow because of the number of calculations that it has to do. At the 0 millisecond mark, so probably the first so this effect is probably located right at the beginning of the show. It starts at the 0 milliseconds and it finishes 215 milliseconds in. So someone's put a plasma effect probably across most of their show. This took more than 150 milliseconds. Specifically, it took 157 milliseconds. So this probably renders quite slowly and takes a fair while to render. And you can see that all of these are the plasma effect. And so if I was this person, and I was frustrated with the rendering time, well, one thing I could do is I could lower the resolution of the whole house model, which means I could go into my layout here, find my, I don't know, I'll pick my, I don't know, my RGB model. And what I could do is I can change this maximum grid size, make it a bit smaller. It won't render as nicely, but that's okay. I can always change it back later when I'm ready to do my house. But if I was to lower that to 200, that would reduce the number of pixels that need to be rendered by a factor of 4 on this model, and it would render a bit faster. And look, when I'm just doing that initial sequencing, that's not the end of the world. It just, obviously, it'll look a little bit grainier than it really would in real life. More pixels would get updated by a single part of the effect, so it would look a little bit blockier. But you can always go back and do it later and fix it up. What else do we have in this one? Not a surprise. Another effect that's running a bit slowly, the galaxy effect, a quite common effect to run slowly because of, again, the amount of math that's involved, and the fact that this works on grade using radian, so it sort of spins around, and the bigger the model, in this case 400 by 121, the smaller the step size that it has to use, and that just leads to it running quite slowly. So while we're here, we'll go into one more log file. This is a log file that has actually been running while we did the demo earlier. You can see that when we load a video, I log all the details about the video, exactly how fast the frame rate is, how big it is, and so forth. This is because every now and then we do run across a video that doesn't render properly or won't open at all, and we can go back into the log file and we can see exactly what was the details of the video and potentially find a way to fix it. So we've been opening the video a fair bit. And with the gladiator effect, it's also logging some duration treatment. These things quite commonly get added when we do work on an effect. We'll throw in some additional things that make sense to log. And if they don't impact on the overall experience, i.e. we try not to log during the render loop. It's okay to log when an effect is first created, but during the render loop, logging can get quite expensive and slow down the render, and so we try not to do that too much. So that's 2017.6 and a rough explanation of the log files. So I'm actually going to break the video here because it's a kind of a nice point to break, and then I will post another link in a moment and we'll come back and we will cover the scheduler.